Robert Hayes had been dreaming about this weekend for weeks. At 63, the retired construction business owner knew exactly what he needed after another draining stretch of work. Managing his rental properties 3 uninterrupted days. At his beloved Lake Tahoe retreat, the drive from Sacramento was worth every mile. The lake had been his sanctuary ever since he and his late wife Linda first laid eyes on it 30 years ago. But as his SUV crunched up the gravel drive, Robert's anticipation turned to confusion, then disbelief. Standing on the deck in matching white bathrobes were his only daughter, Melissa, and her husband, Jason. They sipped coffee as if they owned the place. Behind them, the afternoon sunlight sparkled on the water, but the warmth stopped there. Melissa didn't even smile. "Dad, you can't stay here," she called down, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Jason and I are having a romantic weekend." Robert froze. This was his lake house. He had designed it with Linda, overseen every beam and tile, poured decades of sweat and sacrifice into making it perfect. Before he could speak, Melissa added, "We were here first. We're not leaving." And just like that, the weekend he'd been waiting for collapsed into something else entirely, the first move in a battle Robert never saw coming. A battle that would soon involve Jason's parents, Earl and Marlene, and test just how far a father was willing to go to protect what was his. Robert drove back to Sacramento that night in a silence so heavy it felt like a second passenger. He didn't call Melissa. She didn't call him. But by Monday evening, his phone finally rang. For a brief moment, he hoped she'd reconsider, maybe even apologize. Instead, her voice was cool, almost corporate. "Dad, listen carefully. Jason and I have decided the lake house will belong to his parents now." Robert set his coffee down slowly, gripping the mug to keep his hands from shaking. "Melissa, what are you talking about?" "Earl and Marlene need a real home," she said matter-of-factly. "Their apartment is too small. They'll move in this weekend. You're not to go there anymore." For a moment, Robert just stared at the wall, his mind struggling to catch up. "Melissa, you can't just give away my property." "I can, and I am," she snapped. "You hardly use it. You're being selfish. After everything we've done for you since Mom died, that broke something inside him." "Everything you've done for me?" His voice rose. "Melissa, I paid for your wedding, your car, your college loans, even the down payment on your apartment." "That's what fathers are supposed to do," she interrupted. "Besides, you're old and alone now. What do you possibly need with such a big lake house?" The words landed like a punch, but instead of collapsing, Robert felt an unfamiliar steel in his chest. Linda's gentle voice had always told him to be patient with Melissa after the funeral, but Linda had never heard their daughter speak with this coldness. "They're Jason's parents," Robert said firmly. "Strangers to me, and they're not getting my home." There was a pause, the kind that told him she hadn't expected. Resistance. "You can't say no to me," she finally spat. "I just did," Robert replied, his voice calm but immovable. Her tone turned sharp and threatening. "They're still coming this weekend. Can make it easy or hard, but they're moving in." The call ended, leaving Robert staring at the silent phone. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He thought of every time he'd said yes to Melissa over the past 3 years, every check he'd written, every demand he'd met, every time he'd let her push the boundaries because he was afraid of losing her completely. In his mind, he saw Linda smile, but this time her voice was different. Patience doesn't mean surrender. By morning, Robert's resolve was set. If Melissa wanted to treat this like a hostile takeover, he would respond like the businessman he used to be. The one who had stared down cutthroat developers and won. His first call was to Michael Chen, the attorney who had handled his contracts. For years, Michael didn't waste words. "First, we make sure your ownership is airtight. Then we put up as many legal walls as we can. Trusts, LLCs, you name it." "Can we do it before Saturday?" Robert asked. "That's tight," Michael admitted. "But we'll start today." Robert's second call was to Derek Collins, his next-door neighbor and resident tech wizard. Derek owed him a favor after Robert helped him fix a flooded basement last winter. "I need the lake house turned into a smart home fortress," Robert explained. By Wednesday, the plan was already in motion. Michael was reviewing every deed and record. Derek was sketching out a setup with motion sensors, automated lighting, hidden speakers, and other special effects that made Robert smile for the first time in days. Melissa thought he was an easy mark, an old man too sentimental to fight back. But she'd forgotten who raised her. She'd forgotten the man who built an empire from the ground up, one deal at a time, and she was about to learn that while grief had made him soft, betrayal had made him sharp again. By Thursday, Robert thought. Maybe the storm had passed. Melissa hadn't called since their Monday confrontation. But late that afternoon, his phone lit up with her name. He almost let it go to voicemail. Almost, Dad. She began without greeting. I hope you've come to your senses. Earl and Marlene have already arranged movers for Sunday morning. This is happening, whether you like it or not. Robert kept his voice measured. Melissa, I've already told you the lake house isn't yours to give away. Her sigh came through the line, sharp and full of condescension. You making this so hard? We've been helping you for years, keeping you company since Mom died. Robert cut her off. Helping me? Melissa, you've taken more from me in the last 3 years than I ever thought possible. I've paid off your student loans, bought you a car, covered your wedding, helped with your rent. Every time I told myself it was because family takes care of each other. That's what fathers are supposed to do, she shot back, almost bored. But this, you don't need that place. You're old, you're alone, and you should be thinking about what's best for the family. Jason's parents are family now, and they'll appreciate the lake house more than you ever could. For a moment, Robert didn't say anything. He let the words hang in the air, their cruelty settling like a weight between them. Finally, he spoke. Melissa, I don't know who taught you that family means taking whatever you want from someone else, but it wasn't me. And it sure as hell wasn't your mother. That landed. He heard the slight hitch in her breath. Don't you dare. Bring Mom into this, she hissed. She'd be ashamed of you, Dad. Ashamed that you're being so selfish. No, Robert replied, his voice firm. She'd be ashamed of what you've become. There was a sharp inhale, followed by silence. Then the click of the call ending. Robert set the phone down, his pulse steady, his decision unshaken. For 3 years, he had swallowed every insult, every manipulation, every request that turned into a demand. He had told himself that keeping Melissa close was worth the cost. But hearing her use Linda's memory like a bargaining chip, that was the breaking point. When Michael Chen called later with an update, the deed was secure, but legal reinforcements would take another week. Robert didn't hesitate. Then I'll make sure the house takes care of itself until you're finished, he said. That evening, Derek Collins came over with a grin and a laptop under his arm. I've got some ideas, he said. You want to scare them off without touching them? We can do that. They sat at Robert's kitchen table, sketching out every detail, motion sensors in every room, strobe lights timed to disorient, hidden speakers loaded with recorded voices, faucets and showers that would erupt at full blast without warning, even projection units casting ghostly shadows across the walls. All legal, all automated, and all under Robert's control from his phone. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about sending a message one Melissa would never forget. By the time Derek left that night, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in years. Control Melissa. Thought she could bully him into giving up the place where he and Linda had dreamed of growing old together. She thought his age made him weak, his grief made him blind. But Robert Hayes hadn't built his life by letting people walk over him. And come Sunday morning, his daughter, her husband, and his in-laws were going to find out just how wrong they'd been. Friday morning, Robert woke before sunrise. It wasn't nerves, it was purpose. For the first time in years, he had a plan that didn't involve giving in or compromising. This time, he was taking control. Derek pulled into Robert's driveway at 8 o'clock sharp. His SUV loaded with gear that looked like it belonged in a Hollywood studio. Motion sensors, programmable LED strips, wireless speakers, small projectors, hidden cameras, even industrial-grade battery backups. You ready for this? Derek asked, grinning. More than ready, Robert replied. Let's give my daughter and her entourage an experience they'll never forget. The two men drove up to Lake Tahoe, the road winding through pines and opening up to that familiar expanse of shimmering water. Robert hadn't been there since Melissa threw him out the week before. But instead of sadness, he felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about a property. It was about reclaiming the part of himself he'd lost since Linda passed. Once. Inside, Derek got to work with the efficiency of a man who lived for this kind of challenge. "We'll start with the entryway," he said, mounting a discreet motion sensor above the door. The second they step inside, the system kicks in. They moved from room to room. Strobe lights wired into the ceiling fixtures, speakers hidden behind furniture. Projectors aimed to cast tall, shifting shadows across walls and ceilings. In the kitchen, Derek connected the water lines to a controller that could open every faucet at full blast. In the bathrooms, the showers would roar to life without anyone touching a handle. "It's not just about scaring them," Derek explained. "It's about disorienting them. They won't be able to think straight long enough to fight back." By mid-afternoon, the house was no longer just a building. It was a fully automated defense system. Robert tested it from his phone, smiling. As lights flashed in sequence, voices echoed from nowhere, and ghostly silhouettes glided across the living room wall. "What about power?" Robert asked. "If Jason figures out the breaker box, this all goes away." Derek grinned. "Already covered. Backup batteries in the basement can run this place for a week. Even if they pull the main breaker, everything stays on." Before leaving, Derek mounted a professional-looking sign on the front door. "Welcome to the home of the future. Enter at your own risk." It looked like a marketing gimmick. But Robert knew it served another purpose, a legal warning. Melissa wanted to claim ignorance. She wouldn't have a leg to stand on. As they locked up, Robert stood on the deck, looking out at the lake. The house stood quiet, serene, a far cry from what it would become in less than 48 hours. Driving back to Sacramento, Robert thought of Linda again. She had always been the more diplomatic one, the bridge builder in their marriage. But she also had a sharp edge when it came to protecting their family's hard-earned security. "I think you'd approve of this one." "Linda," he murmured, glancing at her photo on his phone's lock screen. "It's not just payback. It's a lesson she needs to learn." That night, Robert slept better than he had in months. The plan was in motion. Michael Chen was still finalizing the legal protections, but Robert wasn't worried. Even if Melissa somehow guessed what was coming, there was nothing she could do to stop it. He had the deed. He had the law. And now, he had the element of surprise. Sunday morning, when Melissa, Jason, and Earl and Marlene rolled up with their suitcases, they'd be walking into a trap so airtight it would make them think twice before ever trying to take what wasn't theirs again, and Robert would be 200 miles away. Watching it all unfold from the comfort of his own home, with one finger on the activate button. Sunday afternoon, Robert sat in his Sacramento study, 3 monitors glowing in front of him. Each screen displayed a different live camera. Feed from the Lake Tahoe house, the driveway, the entryway, and the living room. On his phone, the home automation app showed every system Derek had installed. Motion sensors armed, lighting effects ready, water controls primed, audio tracks loaded. At 2:27 p.m., a blue minivan appeared on the driveway feed, right on schedule. Melissa stepped out of the passenger seat, her hair gleaming in the sunlight. Jason climbed out from the driver's side, already moving to help his parents Earl and Marlene with their luggage. Judging by the suitcases and boxes they were unloading, this wasn't a weekend visit. They were moving in. Robert leaned back in his chair. Let them get comfortable first. On the entryway feed, he watched as they approached the front door and paused at the sign Derek had mounted. "Welcome to the home of the future. Enter at your own risk." Marlene frowned. "What's this supposed to mean?" Melissa laughed. "Ignore it." Dad probably thought it was cute. Jason shrugged, used a spare key Melissa had obviously kept from years ago, and opened the door. Robert switched to the living room camera. The 4 of them stepped inside, setting their things down. Melissa's voice carried through the speaker system. "Make yourselves at home. This place is yours now." Robert's finger hovered over the activate button, but he waited. Patience was part of the plan. By 10 p.m., The bedroom feed showed everyone settled in for the night. Melissa and Jason were in the master bedroom. Earl and Marlene were in the guest room. The lights were out. Stage was set. Robert tapped the button. The transformation was instant. Every light in the house began strobing white, red, and blue flashes that made the rooms look like they were inside a police raid. Faucets roared to life in the kitchen and bathrooms, spraying water at full force. Then came the voice, "Attention. Unauthorized intrusion detected. You are not the owners of this house. Leave immediately." Melissa shot up in bed, her hair wild, her eyes wide. Jason stumbled after her, shouting, "Where's the breaker box?" Robert smiled. Even if they found it, Derek's backup batteries would keep the systems running for days. In the guest room, Marlene screamed as ghostly shadows slid across the walls. Earl clutched her arms, spinning in circles to find the source. Melissa darted into the hallway, yelling, "Houses don't do this. This is impossible." The voice repeated, louder this time. "Security protocols activated. Authorities have been notified." On the living room feed, Jason yanked at the front door, but the smart lock held for a programmed 30-second delay. The panic on their faces was unmistakable. The more they moved, the more the motion sensors triggered. Footsteps echoed from nowhere, whispers filled the air, and shadows seemed to follow them from room to room. By dawn, the house had run them ragged. When the locks finally disengaged, they bolted for the minivan, soaked, exhausted, and visibly shaken. At 7:30 a.m., Robert's phone rang. "Melissa?" he answered with a calm, "Good morning, sweetheart. How was your night at the lake?" Her voice was shrill. "What did you do? You sick, twisted old man?" Marlene's in tears. Earl nearly collapsed. "Melissa," Robert said gently, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Did you call the police?" "They came at 6. Found nothing." Said, "It was probably some technical malfunction." "Well," Robert replied, "that's a relief. At least you know there was no real danger." "This isn't over," she hissed. "Oh, I think it is," Robert said, his voice calm, almost cheerful. "You wanted a night in my house? You got one. Hope it was educational." He hung up before she could respond, leaning back in his chair with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd just reclaimed not only his property but his dignity. By Tuesday morning, Robert was sipping coffee in his kitchen when his phone pinged. With a motion alert from the Lake Tahoe house, it's curious. He opened the feed and saw a familiar figure, Jason, climbing out of a rented pickup truck. In the bed of the truck were a toolbox, a duffel bag, and a portable lock-changing kit. Robert chuckled to himself. So, they think swapping out a few deadbolts is going to solve their problem. Jason marched up to the front door with a man who was clearly a locksmith. The two bent over the smart lock, the locksmith's hands moving quickly at first, then slowing to a halt. Through the camera's microphone, Robert heard the man say, "These aren't regular locks, sir. They're integrated into a smart home security system with biometric scanning and backup power. It's not exactly your standard job." Jason's irritation. It was obvious. You can't just take it off and put in a regular lock. Not without dismantling the entire system. "Which I can't do without authorization from the owner," the locksmith replied firmly. "Tied to a network. If I tamper with it, it'll alert the system and maybe even the police." Robert leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. Derek's handiwork was flawless. 30 minutes later, the locksmith packed up his tools. "Sorry, pal. You'll need a specialist for this one." The man climbed into his van and drove off, leaving Jason standing on the porch, shoulders slumped. Jason kicked the doorframe before stomping back to his truck. Robert watched him speed away, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The message was clear. They couldn't even get inside without his say-dash. So later that evening, right on cue, Robert's doorbell rang. When he opened it, Melissa and Jason were standing there, both looking as if they'd been stewing for hours. Melissa pushed past him without asking. "This stops now, Dad. Either you give us the lake house," or Robert raised a brow. "Or what?" Jason stepped forward, trying to loom over him. "Or you'll regret it. We'll sue you for harassment, for emotional distress." Robert didn't flinch. "Based on what? That you broke into my house and got spooked by a few lights and noises?" The police already ruled it a malfunction. Melissa's face twisted with frustration. You're not going to win, Dad. We have connections. We can make your life miserable. Robert leaned against the doorframe, his tone calm, almost amused. Melissa, for 3 years, I let you take and take money, time, energy. I kept thinking it was my job to make things easier for you after your mother died. But this is where it ends. Her voice dropped to a hiss. Then you'll never see your grandchildren. When we have kids, they'll never know you existed. You'll die alone, just like Mom. The words were meant to cut deep, but Robert didn't even blink. The same way you expected me to die alone after you gave away my house? Jason's jaw tightened. You'll regret this. Robert straightened, his voice firm. No, I'll regret not stopping this sooner. There was a beat of silence. Then Melissa turned sharply toward the door. Come on, she snapped at Jason. We're done here. Robert didn't move. To stop them. As their car pulled away, he felt no guilt, no second thoughts, just the steady confidence of a man who finally understood that saying no was not cruelty, but self-respect. Tomorrow, he would make a few calls to his attorney and to a notary. If Melissa thought she still had a chance to outmaneuver him, she was about to find out how wrong she was. This wasn't just about the lake house anymore. It was about ending the game she'd been playing for years, once and for all. Wednesday morning, Robert arrived at the law office of Bradley Walsh, his longtime notary, carrying a slim leather folder. Inside were the documents that would put an end to this feud for good. Bradley greeted him warmly. Everything's ready, Robert. Once they walk in, I'll handle the introductions. You'll keep your cool. Robert nodded. Cool is all I've got left for them. At precisely 10 a.m., the door swung open, and in walked Melissa. Jason and Jason's parents, Earl and Marlene. They came in like they were attending a settlement meeting they were sure to win. Melissa took the seat directly. Across from her father, her chin lifted in defiance. Jason folded his arms, and Earl and Marlene sat off to the side, wearing the smug expressions of people convinced they'd soon be handed the keys to a new home. All right, Dad, Melissa began, her voice sharp with authority she hadn't earned. Let's get this over with. You sign the transfer papers, and we'll be done. Robert leaned back, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Actually, Melissa, that's not going to happen. Jason leaned forward. It is, unless you want this to drag out in court. We've been patient long enough. Bradley cleared his throat. I think you all should hear this first, Mr. Hayes. No longer owns the Lake Tahoe property. The room went still. Melissa's eyes narrowed. What do you mean you don't own it? Robert slid the folder across the table. I transferred ownership on Monday morning to a veterans' housing. Charity. The paperwork is complete and legally binding. Earl's mouth fell open. Marlene blinked rapidly. Jason sat back, his arms uncrossing. Melissa's voice cracked. That's impossible. You had no right. Robert's tone was calm but unshakable. I had every right to protect my property from people trying to take it without permission. Jason turned to Bradley, looking for a lifeline. There's got to be a way to reverse this. Bradley shook his head. The transfer is permanent. The charity holds full title. However, he glanced at Robert. Mr. Hayes included a lifetime usage clause for himself as the donor. He can continue to use the property until his passing. Melissa's hand slammed against the table, so you still get to enjoy it, and we get nothing? Robert met her glare. Exactly. You no longer have any claim to it now, or ever. Marlene's voice trembled. So, we have nowhere to go. That's right, Robert said evenly. The same way you expected me to have nowhere to go when Melissa told me to leave my own house. Melissa's defiance was starting to crack, her face paling as the reality sank in. When did you do this? Monday, Robert replied.
The morning after your little visit to the lake house.
Everything you've said to me since then? It hasn't mattered. Jason's voice dropped to a bitter whisper. You planned this all along. I planned to stop letting people take advantage of me, Robert corrected. The rest? That was just strategy. Melissa pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You've destroyed our future. Robert shook his head. No, you destroyed your own by thinking you could bully me into giving up what I built with your mother. Consider this your lesson in boundaries. She stood there, trembling with anger, but there was nothing left to fight over. Without another word, she stormed toward the door, Jason trailing behind, followed by Earl and Marlene in stunned silence. As the door closed, Bradley leaned back in his chair. That was masterfully done, Robert. Robert picked up the folder, tucking it under his arm. 30 years in construction taught me one thing. Always have an exit strategy. And this time the exit was all his. That Friday, Robert drove back to Lake Tahoe alone. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint chill of the season's first frost. The winding road opened up to the familiar sparkle of the lake. And for the first time in weeks, Robert felt a deep calm settle over him. When he unlocked the front door, the house greeted him in perfect silence. No strobe lights, no booming voices, no ghostly shadows gliding across the walls. Derek's elaborate defense system had done its job and was no longer needed. Robert moved slowly through each room, collecting the hidden speakers, disconnecting the motion sensors, and packing away the projectors. He took his time, almost reverently, as if he were peeling away the layers of tension that had wrapped themselves around this home. By mid-afternoon, as the gear was boxed up and loaded into his truck for Derek to collect later, the house was once again just a house. Place of peace, not battle. Robert brewed a fresh cup of coffee and stepped out onto the back deck. The lake stretched out before him, a sheet of glass reflecting the gold and crimson leaves along the shoreline. He leaned on the railing, feeling the quiet in his bones. For years after Linda's passing, this place had been his sanctuary. But somewhere along the way, Melissa's demands, her manipulations, had poisoned it. He'd started avoiding the lake house because being here meant bracing himself for the next call, the next intrusion. Not anymore. The legal transfer to the Veterans Housing Charity had been the cleanest break he could have imagined. The property was safe from Melissa's reach, and he still had the right to enjoy it for the rest of his life. It was his again, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of freedom. He thought about calling Melissa one last time to explain, to tell her that this wasn't about punishing her, but about protecting himself. But as he sipped his coffee, Robert realized the impulse wasn't really for her benefit, it was for his, and he didn't need it. Some lessons couldn't be taught with words. They had to be learned through consequences. As the sun dipped lower, Robert walked down to the dock. The water lapped gently at the wood, the same sound he and Linda used to, listened to while they planned fishing trips or simply sat in companionable silence. He could almost hear her laugh, low and warm, in the back of his mind. "You did good, Rob," he imagined her saying. "Took you long enough, but you did good." Night, he built a fire in the stone fireplace and made himself a simple dinner steak, roasted potatoes, and a glass of red wine. He ate at the dining table alone, but for the first time in years. The solitude felt like a gift rather than a punishment. When he finally turned in, the bed felt warmer, softer somehow. He wasn't just sleeping in a house, he was sleeping in a place that was truly his, in spirit and in law. That made all the difference. Robert knew there would be more phone calls from Melissa, more attempts to push past the boundaries he had set. But he also knew she no longer had any leverage. She could rage, she could threaten, she could disappear from his life entirely, and he would still have his peace. Because peace, he'd learned, doesn't come from keeping everyone happy. It comes from knowing when to close the door and having the strength to lock it behind you. And at Lake Tahoe, the fire crackling and the water whispering outside, Robert Hayes felt more than just peace. He felt home again. It was a week later. When Robert heard the heavy knock on his Sacramento front door, it wasn't the tentative rap of a neighbor borrowing sugar, it was the sharp, deliberate thud of someone who'd come for a fight. When he opened it, there was Melissa, standing with her arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't bother with a, "Hello. We need to talk," she said. Pushing past him into the foyer, Robert closed the door behind her, not because he was afraid she'd leave, but because he didn't want the neighbors hearing what was about to be said. Melissa turned to face him, eyes flashing. "You've humiliated me. You have any idea what you've done to this family? Jason's parents have been telling everyone at their church that you're unstable, that you've lost your mind. Robert folded his hands behind his back. Their opinion is based on not getting a house they didn't own? Then I can live with that. Her voice rose. It's not just about the house. You've made me look like a fool. And for what? Some power trip? Could have just talked to me instead of going behind my back. He let her words hang in the air before answering. Melissa, I talked to you for 3 years. I gave in. I compromised. I bent over backward. And every time I did, you pushed a little further, took a little more. This wasn't about me taking control. It was about me finally stopping you from taking everything. Oh, Melissa's mouth tightened into a thin line. You think you're some hero for what you did? You think Mom would have been proud of this? Robert's eyes didn't waver. Your mother would have been proud that I finally stood up for myself. She wouldn't have wanted our daughter to treat me like a bank account she could drain whenever she felt like it. For a moment, something flickered in Melissa's expression. Guilt, maybe? Or just the sting of truth? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. You're cold, Dad. Heartless. Don't expect me to come running when you're old and need help. Robert almost laughed. Melissa, I'm already old. And I've managed just fine without your help all this time. Her face flushed red. You think you've won? But this isn't over. Robert stepped closer, his tone steady, but final. It is over. Because I'm done letting you treat me like a resource instead of a person. You can call that winning. If you want, but I call it setting boundaries. If that means you walk out of here and never come back, then so be it. Melissa's breath caught. For the first time, she seemed unsure what to say. Robert opened the door. You have a choice, Melissa. You can respect my boundaries and be part of my life. Or you can keep trying to cross them and be out of it. But you don't get both. She stared at him for a long moment, her lips pressed into a thin line before finally stepping out onto the porch. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look back as she walked to her car. Robert watched her go, feeling not joy exactly, but a calm certainty. When the door closed, the house was silent again. He walked back to his study, poured himself a glass of iced tea, and sat in his favorite chair. The world outside could call him stubborn. His daughter could call him heartless. But Robert knew the truth. He had reclaimed his dignity, his home, and his peace. And for a man his age, it was worth more than any property in the world. In the end, Robert didn't win by outsmarting. His daughter, he won by choosing himself. For years, he had confused love with sacrifice, believing that giving in was the same as caring. But love without respect becomes exploitation. And kindness without boundaries becomes weakness. Standing on his porch that final day, watching Melissa drive away, Robert felt a quiet relief settle over him. He hadn't just kept a house. He had reclaimed his dignity, his independence, and his peace of mind. This wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about remembering that we all have the right to protect what we've worked for, and the right to say enough when someone crosses the line. Life lesson. In life, especially as we get older, we owe it to ourselves to guard our peace. As fiercely as we guarded our careers, our families, and our dreams. It's not selfish to set boundaries. It's necessary. Because the people who truly love you will respect them, and the ones who don't. We're never really on your side. If Robert's story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone you cared about? Share your story in the comments. Your words might give someone else the courage they need. And if you want more stories like this, full of strength, wisdom, and hard-earned lessons, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your next moment of inspiration might be just one video away.